What's up, guys? Today we're going to be diving into one of my favorite topics in all of history, the Crusades. So obviously we're going to start with the first one. So the First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. The First Crusade was one of the most significant military, religious, and cultural events of the Middle Ages. It resulted in the capture of Jerusalem by Western powers, Western European Christians in 1099, and the creation of several Crusader states in the Levant. The Crusade transformed relations between Christians, Muslims, and Jews and shaped European and Middle Eastern history for centuries. So why did this happen? So number one, the rise of the Seljuk Turks. So by the 11th century, the Islamic world had undergone some major changes. The Abbasid Caliphate remained the spiritual center of Sunni Islam, but real political power increasingly belonged to the Seljuk Turks. So the Seljuks converted to Sunni Islam. They expanded rapidly across the Middle East. They defeated the Byzantine Empire at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, and they captured much of Anatolia, also known as modern-day Turkey. So Battle of Manzikert, 1071. I have a whole video on that if you guys want to go check that out, but I'm going to describe it briefly. So Byzantine Emperor Romanos IV and Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan are respected leaders of each side. So the Byzantine defeat was catastrophic. Anatolia had long been the empire's military and economic heartlands. After Manzikert, much of the region fell under Turkish control. This defeat directly contributed to Emperor Alexios Komnenos seeking military assistance from Western Europe. Next, we have the Byzantine appeal for help. So in 1095, as I just said, Byzantine Emperor Alexios I, Komnenos, appealed to the West for mercenary assistance against the Seljuk Turks. Alexios hoped for professional soldiers, limited military aid, and the recovery of lost Byzantine territory. He did not expect a massive religious war involving tens of thousands of Western Europeans. So now we have so this is now the birth of the Crusade movement. So we have Pope Urban II and the Council of Clermont, 1095. So Pope Urban II was one of the most important figures of the First Crusade. At the Council of Clermont in November 1095, Urban called Christians to take up arms. So his religious goals included the liberation of Jerusalem, the protection of Eastern Christians, and channel the massive amounts of nightly violence into holy warfare. However, some of the political goals he had in mind was to increase the authority of the papacy, heal the East-West Schism of 1054, and he wanted to unite Christian Europe under the papal leadership. So the spiritual incentive, Urban promised remission of sins, also known as indulgence for all participants. This is revolutionary. So for the first time, we see that warfare becomes an act of Christian devotion, and knights could pursue salvation through military service. So now we have the precursor to the First Crusade. Think of it as like the pre-Crusade. It's known as the People's Crusade in 1096. So before the official crusading armies departed, an unorganized movement emerged. So led by Peter the Hermit. So he was a charismatic preacher who inspired thousands of peasants, very poor laborers, and minor knights. Many believed that Christ's return was imminent and that Jerusalem must be liberated first. And next, we have one of the more darker episodes over here, the Rhineland massacres of the crusading movement. So some crusaders ended up attacking Jewish communities in Mainz, Cologne, and Speyer. Thousands of Jews were murdered, and these massacres revealed that crusading zeal could be directed against perceived enemies within Christendom as well as abroad. Next, so continuing on, we have the destruction of the People's Crusade. So after entering Anatolia, Peter's followers confronted the Seljuk Turks in the Battle of Kayftat in 1096. They were all annihilated. So that was that. Next, we have the Prince's Crusade in 1096 to 1099. So this is like the real crusade. So the main crusading force actually consisted of powerful nobles rather than peasants and laborers. So there was no single commander. However, several inspired leaders decided to cooperate and fight. So here's some major leaders of the First Crusade. So we have Godfrey of Bouillon. He's the Duke of Lower Lorraine. He was a respected military leader, highly zealous, and eventually became the King of Jerusalem. Notably, he refused the title king. Instead, he called himself the Defender of the Holy Sepulchre, which is a how do I describe it? It's a church in Jerusalem, but anyhow, he believed that no mortal should wear a crown where Christ had worn a crown of thorns. So you can see like this guy's super into the whole cause and everything. Next is Raymond IV of Toulouse. He's one of the richest and oldest Crusader leaders. One of some of his characteristics, he's ambitious, deeply pious, and he actually frequently clashed with other Crusader leaders. And he was a commander of one of the largest armies. Next is Bohemond of Taranto. He's a Norman prince from southern Italy, perhaps the most talented military commander of the Crusade. He's very ambitious, experienced as he fought in the Norman invasion of Sicily, ruthless, and a skilled strategist. His personal goal often appears to have been conquest as much as pilgrimage. Next is Tancred. This is Bohemond's nephew. He's remembered as courageous, aggressive, and an effective battlefield commander. Later became a major ruler in the Crusader states. Now we have Robert Porthos, the Duke of Normandy. He is the son of William the Conqueror, and he led Norman forces from northern France. Next is Hugh of Vermandois, brother of King Philip I of France, and he's a represented Capetian, that's the royal family of France at the time, with a lot of royal prestige. Next is Adhemar of Le Puy. He is a papal legate. He serves as a spiritual leader, diplomatic mediator, and the representative of Pope Urban II himself. However, his death in 1098 hurt the Crusaders' unity. Now we have Alexios Komnenos. He is not like a Crusader leader, but he did play a critical role. He demanded Crusader leaders swear oaths to return former Byzantine territory. Many of these Crusaders actually ended up breaking these promises, and this created centuries of Byzantine Crusader distrust. Moving on, we have the journey across Anatolia. So the siege of Nicaea in 1097 was so Nicaea was the Seljuk capital in Anatolia. The result, so the city surrendered to Byzantine forces, and Alexius prevented the Crusaders from looting it. And this angered many of the Crusaders who were looking for rewards. Now we have the Battle of Dorylaeum in 1097. So key figures here are Bohemond, Godfrey, and Raymond. A key Seljuk leader here is Kiliji Arslan. And the battle, so the Turks launched a surprise attack using horse archers and hit-and-run tactics. Initially, the Crusaders were suffering very much until reinforcements arrived. So the result was a Crusader victory. And the significance behind this is that it demonstrated the resilience of the Crusaders and the effectiveness of heavily armed knights. Now, the Crusaders could survive against the Turkish tactics. Now, moving on, we have the Siege of Antioch, so 1097 to 1098, one of the greatest military achievements of the Crusade. So why was Antioch important? So Antioch was one of Christianity's oldest cities, and it was a strategic gateway into Syria. Its walls stretched for miles and were considered nearly impregnable. So the siege itself lasted around 8 months. Crusaders really suffered from starvation, disease, and desertion, and thousands of soldiers died. Now here, Bohemond actually he betrays them. So Bohemond secretly negotiated with an Armenian guard named Firuz. The guard followed Crusaders into the city. In June 1098, Antioch fell. And shortly afterward, there was a Muslim counterattack. A huge Muslim army under the Kerboga of Mosul surrounded Antioch. So now the Crusaders were trapped inside. the Holy Lands. So at the lowest point, a monk named Peter Bartholomew claimed to discover the spear that pierced Christ's side. Many crusaders viewed this as divine intervention, so morale ended up surging. So the battle outside Antioch in 1098, the crusaders marched out and defeated the Kerbaga of Mosul. And the significance of this is many contemporaries consider this miraculous, and it preserved the crusade. So without this victory, the crusade would have likely collapsed. Next, moving on, we're going to look into the Muslim leadership and their weaknesses. So one of the reasons of the Crusaders' success was Muslim political fragmentation. The Islamic world at this time was divided among the Seljuks, Fatimids, local emirs, and rival dynasties, so there wasn't necessarily a united Muslim front like we see with the Crusaders. So some important figures, I mentioned him earlier. So Kiliji Arslan, he's the Seljuk ruler of Anatolia, and he initially underestimated the Crusaders. Next is Kerbaga, he's the ruler of Mosul. He led a relief force at Antioch, and it failed because of internal rivalries, poor coordination, and distrust among allies. Next is Al-Afdal Shahan Shah. So he's the Fatimid vizier of Egypt. He captured Jerusalem from the Seljuks shortly before the Crusaders arrived, and would later lead the army that is defeated at Ascalon. So the march to Jerusalem. So by 1099, only a fraction of the original Crusaders remained. Perhaps around 12,000 to 15,000 soldiers survived. Many had died from disease, starvation, combat, and yet the survivors remained highly motivated. So now we're getting into the juice of it. So the siege of Jerusalem in 1099. So the defenders, Jerusalem was controlled by the Fatimid Caliphate. So the city was heavily fortified. So some of the Crusader problems: the Crusaders lacked water, food, siege equipment, and success increasingly seemed unlikely. Construction of siege towers. So Crusaders dismantled local timber and built siege engines. Genoese sailors helped provide materials and expertise. Now moving on, we have the final assault. So July 1099, key figures such as Godfrey of Bouillon and Raymond of Toulouse. Godfrey's forces reached the wall first. And so now this moves on to the capture and massacre of Jerusalem. So after entering the city, Crusaders massacred many of the residents, and some of the victims of this violence included Muslim, Jews, and actually Eastern Christians. So medieval sources describe the widespread killing, and the exact numbers still remain debated. So why did this happen? So obviously religious fanaticism, medieval siege warfare customs, years of hardship and suffering, and a desire for vengeance. So to Crusaders, the capture fulfilled the will of God. To Muslims and Jewish people, it became a symbol of Crusader brutality. Moving on to the Battle of Ascalon, 1099. So immediately after Jerusalem's capture, a Fatimid army advanced from Egypt. So we have Godfrey of Bouillon and Al-Afdal Shahan Shah. So the result was a decisive Crusader victory, and it secured the Jerusalem front. It ended the First Crusade successfully, and it prevented an immediate Muslim reconquest. So next is the creation of the Crusader states. So following the victory, the Crusaders established 4 states. So we have the County of Edessa, founded in 1098, the Principality of Antioch, ruled by Bohemond, the County of Tripoli, established later by Raymond's followers, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the most important Crusader state. So these states would survive in various forms for nearly 2 centuries. So why did the Crusaders win? So is their, number one, their religious motivation. So the Crusaders genuinely believed that God was on their side, Jerusalem was their sacred objective, and salvation depended upon them completing this pilgrimage. Second is their strong leadership, so such as Godfrey, Bohemond, and Raymond and Tancred. So these were experienced warriors. Next is the Muslim disunity. So Perhaps this is the single greatest strategic factor. So Muslim rulers often fought one another instead of cooperating. Next is the Byzantine assistance. So Alexios provided supplies, naval support, and intelligence, especially during the early campaign. Adaptability. So the Crusaders learned how to fight the Turkish horse archers, which was a revolutionary type of warfare for that time, in desert conditions as well, and they were able to sustain long sieges despite their initial disadvantages. Moving on, we have the historical significance. So the First Crusade was unique among all crusades because it actually achieved its primary objective of capturing Jerusalem. However, its consequences included, so for Europe, it had increased papal prestige, expansion of trade with the East, and the growth of crusading ideology. For Byzantium, they had some temporary territorial recovery, and they ended up having a long-term distrust of Western crusaders. So for the Islamic world, it was a huge shock and humiliation, and it eventually led to the call for jihad under leaders such as Nur al-Din and Saladin. For the Jewish communities, the beginning of centuries of Crusader-era persecutions, and for Christian-Muslim relations, it intensified religious hostility and created memories of violence that endured for generations. So, yeah, yeah, that's about it.